This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
Alrighty, welcome to episode 80 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we are joined by Knicks studio analyst on MSG. You can catch him on ESPN. You can also hear him on the radio daily. He is Alan Hahn. Alan, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. The newest co-host of Afternoon Drive on ESPN New York. So first of all, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You've been a New York radio host for over a decade now. Does Afternoon Drive in New York still feel like a big deal? Like, is it special?
I hope so. I want to make sure it stays that way. I still think there is some cachet to it. I mean, for me, for anybody that does radio, especially in New York, it's sort of the holy grail, right? Like, it's something that you strive for, but because there is such longevity in those positions that it is sort of a waiting game, is to see, will there be any changes and would I be ever part of it? And there are a lot of times that I didn't think it would ever be a possibility. So, the opportunity is one that I look at as, the biggest of my career so far, and something that I am hoping that while we've seen the landscape change in how people are consuming radio and sports talk, it still to me feels like, it is the pinnacle and it is the biggest audience. And now it's up to me to make sure that the audience not only stays, but grows. And that's my biggest challenge.
The show and the new lineup for the station officially launches in 2 weeks, January 6th. But you, Don LaGreca and Peter Rosenberg had like a soft opening last week. How did that feel? How was the chemistry in week one?
I felt like it was instant, right? Like, I didn't feel like there was a lot of awkwardness to it whatsoever. And probably a lot of it has to do with two factors. One, I've known those guys for a long time. I've been their lead-in for the better part of the last 5 years. I've known Michael and Don for, over a decade. And I've listened to their show. I've consumed that show because when I got off the air, I would drive home and the first thing I would do is put their show on and listen to them. So the feel for both of those guys, Peter and Don, their cadence, what they like to do, what makes them tick, all those things are sort of as if I was a point guard and I watched a lot of film on the team I just got traded to, right? Like, I look at it like that. So I never felt like there was any type of awkwardness. There's always going to be the beginning, some steppage, some a little bit of wrestling over, okay, I'm taking the lead here, but I don't want to be too aggressive. So that's what I liked about having this week. This felt like a preseason, right?
Yeah.
Like, we got some games in before the games really count. And I thought it was really beneficial for all three of us to figure it out. And by the time we got to Friday, it definitely felt very comfortable and something definitely to build off of.
Had you worked with either one of them before?
Yeah, both of them. I have not Don as much. I actually called a Knicks game with Don. Don did a radio call last year. It was an unbelievable game. It was Knicks Heat. It was an in-season tournament game. The Knicks scored like 21 straight points in the third quarter. So it was a wild game. And here's Don, who just kept saying to me, like, I'm a hockey guy. You got to help me through it. And we're having one of the most epic games ever. And he's calling it, but he's got such that power in his voice.
Yeah.
That a moment like that, you don't need to know basketball. You just know this is whatever's happening. It's freaking cool. So we did that together. We had a great time doing that. Not as much time together. Peter and I I've filled in a lot in past years on the K show in the summer months when guys take off. And I've worked with him, and, we both have had some hilarious moments. My favorite includes when we came up with the bullpen coyote idea, when Rob Manfred was trying to come up with new ways to make baseball interesting. Somehow we found, this is again typical summer sports talk radio, we found a whole segment based on what if you released a coyote from the bullpen, some crazy stuff. So I know like the offbeat kind of stuff that Pete likes. I enjoy that stuff too. So, not extensive reps with either one, but again, just knowing them and listening to the show as much as I have, I do feel like I know them both pretty well.
So is it a positive or a negative for you that Don and Peter have worked together for almost a decade? Like, is it harder to find your way and voice when they already have that comfort level and way of doing things?
It's a great question because what I'm trying to avoid, like it's a very delicate path I'm walking here because first of all, I'm replacing the station's, marquee,
Yeah.
right, and Michael K. And I don't want it to sound like I'm filling in for Michael K. I want our show to have its own sound, but I also don't want to step in and say, okay, I'm the main voice and Peter and Don are still the supporting cast guys. Like, I don't want that either. So it is delicate. I want to make sure I have a strong enough voice that I'm not just acting like a fill in, but I also don't want to be overwhelming and make those guys feel like they're still, just, I hate using the word sidekicks, Brandon, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Like that they're
Yeah.
just where they have been all along because Michael was such a powerful voice. So it is definitely delicate. Um, we're going to have to figure that part of it out. I think that's got to come in time where everyone will just figure out the role. I don't want to say hierarchy, but the understanding of, I'm the guy that's going to bring us in and take us out. I'm the guy that's going to, move the conversation along. I want to be more of a point guard, John Stockton, than a James Harden, right? Like I want to be a little more like that because I think there's a lot more out of Don LaGreca than everybody has heard. I think there's a great opportunity for him to really emerge, and then Peter also, who had been used a lot as like the funny guy on the show. There is more in him too that I want to get out. So there's a lot of that. But when it comes to Kay, you're replacing a guy that I think people are just used to his voice and his personality, and there's going to be some that don't like change. And I feel like my goal, this might sound crazy, but I'll do a Yankee analogy. I need to be Tino Martinez to his Don Mattingly. Fans love Don Mattingly. He was there for a long time. Tino came in, and it's like, what's this guy about? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And it took him having a couple of moments to where, and of course, success, and fans eventually warmed up to Tino Martinez. That's kind of, I guess, my approach to it.
So what about Don and Peter's approach? Like, do they want this to be, no, like this is how we've done things, it's worked for us, this is what we want the show to be, and you just kind of fill in and are just replacing Kay, or do they want this to feel like an entirely new show?
From talking to them, they want it to feel like a new show.
Yeah.
That much I can say. You'd have to ask them, of course,
Sure.
what exactly they want, because there are some elements from the former Michael K show that were very entertaining, that were very good radio,
Yeah.
that I do think is worth carrying over. Look, my ego's not that big that I need to feel like, no, wipe it all away. This is my show now. We're going to do it my way. I'm not like that. I was a fan of the Michael K show. I was a listener. I always say I'm a P1. So there was stuff about it. I'm like, no, man, we're going to do that because I think that's fun. In fact, I think we can take it and make it better. I also believe in comfort food. And I think your listener base does feel a certain way, that they don't want that dramatic change. Wait a minute, what happened to ENN? Wait a second, what happened to this? I used to love these drops. I loved when you guys did this. I don't mind any of that stuff. It's not going to make me feel marginalized. But we do have to have a fresher sound and a fresher feel. And that is something, again, that's just that it's a balance, Brandon. It's a balance that we're going to have to figure out. We're going to have to work out. And I think give it in time, it will get its own pace and rhythm. And then the listener base will sort of never forget about the K show, but sort of move into the new era of where the show's going to be. But it is different because most of the time, you know this better than I do probably, in most major markets, when you make a change from somebody that's had the job for 20 years, rarely is it a similar show. Usually it's like dramatic difference in voice and sound and all that stuff. After Francesa left the fan, dramatic change from one voice to another when they did that, what they did. So this is going to be interesting to see how it works and how much the listeners stay with it, because it's not a dramatic change. It does have a familiarity to it.
Yeah, I think like Greg Giannotti was in a similar situation when he replaced Craig Carton.
Good example
with Boomer Esiason, but it's definitely rare. So like you have that, and it took them months before it really. I think you heard the comfort level and realized that it was a different show, even though there were a lot of the same personalities on the show.
Yeah. You gave me a good idea, actually, because I probably should reach out to Gio fellow Long Islander,
Yeah.
and just get his opinion or get some advice from him on how he did it, because that's pretty good. I didn't even think about that, but you're right. Powerful voice that listener group loved
Right.
in Craig, and he had to step in and fill that role. And I'm sure there were a lot of people that at the beginning weren't thrilled with it.
Yeah.
So he's a great example. And it helped that Boomer, of course, was a great teammate about it.
Yep.
And that's what I think Don and Peter have been for me. They have been nothing but supportive, all for it. They wanted to work, all those things. I think that's a valuable part of it.
Yeah. Is Don, Hahn, and Rosenberg, is that the official name?
It is. Yeah, it is. It does sound like a law firm. We always joke about that. And the first names would have been easier, but I guess for Peter, he's more known for his last name, Rosenberg.
Yeah.
I'm known more for my last name. So, but the rhyme was there with Don and myself.
Yeah.
We just couldn't figure out a way to continue the rhyme. So that's what we're going with right now. It's a little close to the morning show. Those guys, DiPetro and Rothenberg, DNR.
Yeah.
We're DHR. So I don't know how we're going to do all that stuff, but Don, Hahn, and Rosenberg doesn't fit on a T-shirt nearly as well as DHR does. So we got to work on that.
And I think not to be understated, just is the fact that after 20 years in Afternoon Drive, Don finally has his name on the show like that.
I was adamant
well
about
deserved.
that. I was adamant, and first, by the way,
Yeah.
I made sure of that one because I did feel a certain way about it. I know he did, because there were other suggestions. I'll let you know. There was some thought of, how about instead of using your names, we just call it something. One of the jokes was, because remember, there was a joke that Don and Peter used to make, when there's no Michael K, it's just the show. So there was some thought of, how about we just call it the show? There were other thoughts, and I'm like, no, we got to put Don's name on this thing somehow, some way, and we're going to put the names in the show, and we'll go from there. So there was a pushback on anything other than making sure that our names were on the title and Don's was first.
Yeah, no, I think that was definitely the right play there. I know Kay had mentioned that he thought he could do at least one more year of Afternoon Drive. So how did you end up in this spot now? Like, why do you think the station decided now was the time to make a change?
Well, I think it was Michael that wanted to pull back. I think this is what he's talked about, is the stress of what he did that I'm going to learn about now a little bit, which is you go right from your show into a broadcast that night. And it's obviously a lot different because he was doing it every single night. Baseball's every day. Whereas for me, the NBA is not every day. I call some games for MSG, but for the most part, a home game, I'm a sideline guy. Road games, I'm a studio guy. For the most part, I do have my share of games where I'll be filling in for Clyde Frazier. That's going to be challenging to prepare. And that's, he's going to sit down with me and help me through that. But he did talk about how it's a lot. And moving to a midday slot buys him some time in between, gives him a break, and it doesn't become the monotony that I'm sure it became for him. But that's something I think he just decided to do. And it opened up, a seat. Part of me was disappointed that Bart Scott wasn't coming with me, because we put 5 years together, and I love our chemistry together. He's just a lot of fun, but there was only one seat open, and I hate to sound corny, but it's like, I do feel fortunate, blessed, all those things, that I was in the right place at the right time. There was probably other options they could have considered. They went with me, which shows a trust in me, and it's not something I take lightly.
What is your relationship with Michael K?
Again, I look at him as a mentor. I mean, he's a friend, of course, but I've leaned on him a lot over the years about a lot of things when it comes to my career. I've always joked with him, Jack Curry, even Peter Vesey. I've always said, you guys were sports writers who got into the broadcast business, and if you guys sucked at it, I'd still be a sports writer. Like, people would say, they can't do this. The sports writer thing doesn't work. But their success kind of opened the door for a lot of the rest of us, other guys who have moved out of the newspaper business and into broadcasting. And so I've always joked with him about that. But yeah, I watch him, and I watch his career, and I watch what he does and how he handles himself and different things. And I take all the notes I can, because, again, in our business, when it comes to guys who are doing the team broadcast as much as he is, having that kind of voice, who came out of the business as a journalist, I can't think of anybody that's done it better.
Do you think he's rooting for the new show to succeed? And I ask that because like he has in the past said on air that if he ever leaves the show, that he would be rooting for the show to do worse than when he was there. Now, I think I will say it's a little bit different because like that probably assumed that he was getting fired or it was ending on a sour note or something like that. Whereas it's a little bit different that he's choosing to leave and he's still part of the station, but still have to ask, do you think he's rooting for the show?
So I called him out for that on his last show when they had me on. They did their farewell show at a bar in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I brought up. And I said, I heard you say this. Heard you say that you root for it to fail. I said, I take that personally, like just teasing with him. And exactly what he said. He said, I only said that if I was leaving the station, but because I'm still at the station, he said, I just, now, of course, I want to see everybody succeed. So I think a lot of that's tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
But I mean, how would you feel? Would you want to see the show you've been on for 22 years suddenly just skyrocket to number one and just dominate and be great all because of one change made, and that change was you? How would you feel? It's got to be a little. So I'll allow a little part of him. It's like, all right, you could be good. Don't be that good though.
Right.
Don't be that. Don't make people forget me.
Right.
So it's like, do you remember who hosted before Stephen Colbert?
That was Letterman.
Craig Kilborn.
On CBS.
On CBS. Kilborn. Yeah. And then how about before Jon Stewart? Like there was like you see how things like you forget sometimes because the next guy becomes better than the first or the original.
Yeah.
And I feel like I would allow that for Ken. It's okay if he's a little rooting for it to just be good, but don't be great. It's fine with me. But my aim is to, it's 20 years from now, people are like, what was that show that was on before you? Like, that's my goal.
Yeah. I mean, look, you can't be in this business without an ego. So I get it from both standpoints. How did you end up co-hosting with Rick DiPetro earlier in your radio career?
It's a funny story. So this was, again, before I knew I was going to do this full time. Like, again, everything I've done on broadcasting side has never been planned. Anything since I left Newsday has been sort of, tripping into it, I guess. I always say that this career, I didn't pursue this career, it pursued me. So I was just hosting, like Saturday mornings, random fill-ins at night, that kind of stuff. So when
were you at Newsday at the time when you started doing your, okay, so you were done with Newsday.
I was at MSG. Yeah, I left Newsday for MSG, and I thought I'm just going to do the broadcasting thing. Like, okay, that's fine. I never thought about doing radio until Tim McCarthy, and Justin Craig dragged me in kicking and screaming. Because I had never trained for, I didn't know anything about the business. They taught me. And so, again, I started filling in. Quick, funny thing, the very first show I ever hosted by myself, I came in not knowing I was hosting by myself until I said, when's the host coming in? They said, no, you're the host. I'm like, what? So I came in. The first segment's 10 minutes long. I'm going. Like, I get out of the gate and I give it all I got. And then I stop because I'm out of whatever I needed to talk about. There's not a single call. And I look at the time and I still got 7 minutes left. I'm like, oh my God, I was sweating. So it just shows you where I was. But Rick, who I had covered, he was with the Islanders, and that was one of the beats I had at Newsday. And I met him when he got drafted. He was 19 years old. We hit it off right away. So we always stayed in touch. He would text me during these shows when he was still playing. And he would text me like sports thoughts, like anything topic I'm talking about, he would text me his thoughts. And it was always pretty good, like funny, insightful, a lot of that stuff. So I would always tell him, like, but one of these days, like, you got to come in and do a show with me. And he's like, oh, I'd love that. So I saw him at a golf outing and we were just like hitting it off. And then I go, what are you doing tonight? He's like, what do you mean? I go, I'm hosting again tonight. And instead of you texting me, why don't you come in? He's like, is that okay? I'm like, just come in. If you don't like it for a segment, go home. So he met me in the studio, sat down for a segment, and it turned into 3 hours. And like ESPN New York didn't have any idea. So, but again, Tim McCarthy, Justin Craig, they heard it and they're like, this is good. So Rick's like, what do I do? I go, we're going to keep bringing you in until they tell me to stop. So that week he kept coming in. and he was doing it for nothing. They weren't paying him, and it just sounded good and sounded good. So it just became, this is a good sound. Why don't you guys do more together? We started getting them paid. And then they gave us that show, Hahn and Humpty, which I wasn't ready for, but we did it. And that's really how it all began. And I can't be nothing but proud about what he's turned it into, because this was a guy whose career ended in a really depressing way with
Yeah.
injuries. He couldn't play anymore. And he was the most competitive guy you could meet. So the fact that he found something post career that he can turn into something like he has right now, where he's a fantastic morning radio host, it's, like, it's one of my favorite stories to tell. It's like, I always joke with him. I dragged you out of your basement and I turned you into a radio host. But he did so much of the work. He's great. So that's really the genesis of him, and how he and I had a show that, was, for its time, was pretty good.
Yeah, no, and that's pretty impressive that you were able to kind of spot that talent as well, especially like you being a pretty raw radio host at that time yourself. But to be able to find somebody who has now had a decade-long career as a morning drive host in New York, that's pretty good.
We share the same agent, and I always tell my agent that, I should get at least 2% out of this contract. Fighter's fee.
Yeah. Is it so? Were you becoming friends with Rick while you were covering the Islanders? I don't. What years were you covering the Islanders? What years was he playing? Like, or did that relationship start after?
It was, so he was drafted in 2000. I started covering the team in 99, and I covered the team up until 2006. And so he was up and down for like the first 2 seasons, and then he became a regular. I think that the third year he was a regular. So we didn't see each other a ton, but it was like the first time I met him at the NHL draft in 2000. He was the number 1 pick, and there was a big table. Like, he did his electronic media. Then there was a huge table for the print media, and he's waiting at the table. I'm waiting at the table. There's nobody else sitting there because the Islanders weren't covered as extensively as everybody else. And even though he's the number 1 pick, I was sitting at the table by myself, and he goes, "Is this all there is?" And so I said, "I'm all you need." And he laughed right away. He was like, "Oh, I like that." Like, and so it just was one of those, we hit it off. Even when there were times as a player, he didn't like things that I would write, he would talk to me about it more in a debate form than he would take offense and be mad. Like, he would be more of like fighting me on it, and we'd get back and forth. So we already had sort of that give and take going. The friendliness thing happened, I think, once I went to the Nick beat, and I followed him because personally just liked him and wanted to see how he would do. And so we stayed in touch, off and on that way. And as the injuries piled up, I really felt bad, and I really tried to support just, keeping him positive and stuff. And just for some reason, we kind of hit it off that way. But we got real close once we started doing the show. And that was something that, again, those were the years, those early years where, we're on at night, we're going to bars, doing all kinds of promotions, everything we can do, golf outings, just anything with sponsors. It was a lot. 2 years of just grinding to try to put a name on the show and get support behind the show. And that's, probably the most fun I've had doing radio. And that's kind of what got me feeling like I really want to do this.
And did Rick have any aspirations of playing again when he started on the radio?
He knew it was over when it comes to, his body. Just, it was difficult for him. He had tried one other time to come back. He went into the minors, and he went to Germany just to see if he can get himself healthy again and play. And, you could just feel it, like, just talking to him about his career, the end of his career, you could feel it. Like, he reached that point of, I hate to use the word surrender, but, he kind of knew, like, that's it. Like, I just can't play the way I normally could, because the body just wouldn't let him anymore. And I think, again, that's what makes his takes on a lot of things when it comes to athletes, such a great perspective to get, because he doesn't have that, like, the invincibility of the athlete. He has more of the relatability of the athlete that has that feeling of, I could have been more. but my body wouldn't let me. He always talks about the nirvana of where the mind and the body are in the same place, where you're smarter than you were as a young player, but your body still can do a lot of the things you could as a young player. And that's a place I think he didn't exist there for long, but he did have it when he was an all-star.
What was it like when Chris Canty was added to the show? And that's obvious. That's very different from the situation you're in now, where you are taking over for that third for
Yeah.
Michael Kay, whereas Canty was now that's the new third voice being added to a show.
That was two things. It was great because Canty is such a great teammate. His energy is off the charts. His knowledge for the NFL is fantastic. There was so much about Chris that I loved working with, but there was a challenge now to balancing Rick, who I had leaned on so much, who had so much to say, and now I'm trying to make sure that Chris gets in his part, and making it sort of equal parts. It's not easy to do, and that again, the reason why I walked away from that show when I did had nothing to do with the guys.
Yeah.
It had to do with me and feeling like I was not getting it done right. I wasn't getting it done, and I had to do more on my own to get better as a host because I didn't want to hold the show back. I could feel frustration not between them, but from both of them about the amount of time that they had to get into a topic. And that's one of the challenges as a host. The clock works against you because you introduce a topic, one guy starts talking, another guy's talking, and the element of play some audio to support it, take a call to support it, and the next thing you know, I'm like, we're late. I got to get out. And now you're telling somebody that they got another point to make, and you're cutting them off. It's a lot for somebody that wasn't experienced like I was. So the dynamic, we had moments where I felt like that dynamic was phenomenal, but there were other times where I just knew this is a challenge. I'm not getting enough out of both of them. I'm not making them better, and I had to have a real talk with myself about this. This is not working out, and I need to step away. And then that's when Dave Rothenberg stepped in, and he was fantastic. I mean, he was seamless because he got it. He was an experienced host. He knew what he was doing, and he got the most out of those two guys. And now again with Rick, but Canty as a radio guy, and you see him now on the national network in the morning. I mean, I think he's a superstar. I just think he's so good, so well prepared. He's got all the levels you want. He's funny, he's intense, and his knowledge of not just football, which is his sport, but of all other sports is unmatched. I think he's developed too into a phenomenal radio guy. And here's another guy that when he was playing for the Ravens, he started by being a weekly with Rick and I. He was still playing in the NFL. He'd come on as a weekly. And when the season ended, he started coming in because he liked it too. And that's kind of where it evolved, where we added him as the third guy.
So when you left that show, that was more about you wanting to almost get more reps on your own. And because I had thought you left because of your schedule, just have it being harder to do a show earlier in the day, a radio show earlier in the day, and then having to go to MSG at night. So like this was more, and especially being that at that time, the station had the Knicks on their airwaves. So like if the Knicks were on, then your evening show wasn't going to be on, but then you were at MSG. So like it seemed like it fit your schedule better.
It did. It worked out well because of that. And publicly, that's what I said. But because they moved us, we were a 12 o'clock show. They moved us to 10.
Yeah.
And it was a challenge, but not something I couldn't have done.
Okay.
I mean, I do get up the night after a game.
Right.
And get up. You're in the studio by 7 o'clock in the morning. So I'm waking up 4:30 in the morning after a game. So it's doable when you feel good about what you're doing. My problem was I didn't feel good about what I was doing. And so I had to. I knew it. I could feel it every day. I'm not getting the most out of this show, and it's taken away from my energy at night on MSG. And I didn't want two things now to be affected. So I had to, like I said, I had to have a talk with myself and just realize, like, okay, you've never trained for this. You kind of baptism by fire with this show, and maybe you need to figure some things out. Truth be told, I was going to quit radio. Tim McCarthy wouldn't let me. I was done. I was saying to myself, I suck at this because I'm making two guys who are really good miserable. I'm not doing it well for this show. I'm not good at this, and maybe I just need to realize like I wasn't cut out for this and I need to go. And so I told Tim, like, maybe I just, bit off more than I can chew. And he said, no, I'm not letting you do that. And Dave Rothenberg was working the 7 to 10.
Yeah.
So the easy swap was to do that. He said, just do that and see how it feels. And what you said is what helped me, because it wasn't every night.
Yeah.
The Rangers, even when they played, I wasn't working.
Right.
So a lot of times through the winter, it made life easier. I just got a chance to take a breath. My youngest daughter was just born. I got to be home during the day with her for her first 2 years. And it just helped me kind of reset. I listened to a ton of radio. I listened to the shows, and I started to figure it out. And then at night, being on my own, I had to learn how to run a show and make sure elements are in there and make it entertaining. And things just started to click. I had a bunch of young producers that night. Anthony Pusik's one of them. He now produces the afternoon drive for us. And Ty Butler, who's become a host, he was one of the producers. I just learned when I worked with them, collaboration, how important that was with producers rather than fighting with them. I had to just take a breath and figure it out. It's almost like I had to, and I hate to say minor leagues because night shows are not minor leagues, but I had to just kind of like go to the minors, work on my game. And then when it was time to come back, I was definitely well prepared and ready for it. It could have been the worst thing that happened. It could have been something I just completely walked away from. And Tim just said, no, it's there. You just need to take a breath. I'm not letting you quit. Just do this at night and see how you feel. And then it's worked out for the better.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, just because like we talk about the ego that you need to be successful in this business. But I think that self-awareness is probably pretty rare. Like, I think there's plenty of hosts that would have been in that situation and would have been blaming Rick and Chris, as opposed to kind of recognizing that maybe you yourself needs to do a better job.
It's exactly true. I never wanted to blame them because all they wanted was to do a great show. And I could sense their frustration at times if I was missing it or, mishandling it or fumbling, all the little things that I could feel. You know how it is. Like, when you're screwing up, like, when you're not right.
Yeah.
And that's what I kept feeling. And then you get the sense, and I guess one of my skills is awareness, if that's even a skill. But I generally have a pretty good awareness and self-awareness, and that's sort of what I was feeling. And like, the last thing I'm going to do is point fingers and say it was someone else's fault when I know, the blame. Like Rick always used to say, not about me, but he would talk about athletes, point the thumb, not the finger. That was his whole thing. So I would hear that and think to myself, yeah, you need to listen better. And I did a lot of listening back on shows that we did, especially certain segments. And then I would hear it like, oh God, like, just hated it. And that was what led me to just that epiphany of, you need to get away. Like, you need to step back. Like, they deserve better. And again, it proved out to be true.
How was working with Bart Scott the last few years?
It's phenomenal. I mean, he just so much fun. My biggest frustration with that show was the fact that we moved so much that we never, like, we were 12 to 2 to begin, 2 hours. We went by so fast. We used to laugh like it was like, that's it, like, we're done. And then they expanded us to 3, taking us right into the drive time show, and that was good. Then they moved us to national, which was an unbelievable experience. But there was always this sense of, like, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, because we were still in New York and our biggest audience was New York.
Yeah.
So there was this sense to keep feeding New York because it was important, but also don't neglect the fact that you are national, and people in, Des Moines, Albuquerque, and, Fort Myers don't want to hear you talking about the Yankees and the Knicks and the Jets and the Giants. You need to talk about everything. And we tried to balance it as best we could, but that was, that was always a frustration. But by the time I thought we found the rhythm, and it was fun. Then they brought us back local, and that, sort of was like another adjustment, because we were number 3 in the market right before we went national, and we were really making strides. National hurt us, and then coming back to local, we never recovered that audience that we had when we were, beating FAN in middays. And, that was, again, part of the challenge. But Bart's a lot of fun. It's easy to get him going. I think his energy is great. It's perfect for that time of day, middle of the day, 12 o'clock. Guys are getting, people are going out, getting lunch in their cars, whatever it is. And it's sort of that, the right vibe for that time of day. And it was a lot of fun. And he's another, like, you want to give credit. He always tells me that when he made the move to come over to ESPN New York, they asked him, who do you want to work with? He's another one that used to call into my show at night, and he would also debate me on stuff. He'd be in the car driving, he'd call. And he told them me. He wanted me. And that's what got me from night back to the midday, is him saying, of the host you have, I want him. And I've never forgotten that, because that gave me my second chance to sort of reprove myself that I could do a show, that I could host it, in the middays. It could have a good sound, and I can get the reps that I needed to then get to a point now where they would consider me to do afternoon drive.
Bart was obviously he was part of the show that replaced Francesa on WFAN after Mike's first retirement. Have you asked or talked to Bart at all about the challenge of taking over for a heritage or renowned radio show or host?
Yeah, and like you would expect from him too, it wasn't something that he ever thought was overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like he looked at it like it was time. Like they needed a new sound. But as, again, from what I mentioned earlier about me, what I'm trying to do is that the audience that is so used to one voice in such a long time and one time slot, there's a resistance to anything new and dramatic. Yeah. And that show, when you consider his voice especially, that's a dramatic change from back after this. Like it's a big difference. And so I think he knows that there was met with resistance, and he feels like we didn't get enough time, that they just needed the time to eventually transition the audience that would start to appreciate what CMB was bringing to the table. He has told me, like we didn't get enough time, but he never looked at it like, oh, it was really hard. This guy's such an icon. Remember, he's a Detroit guy. He did play in New York. He is a New Yorker now, but he didn't, like a lot of us, grow up hearing Mike and the Mad Dog and Francesa's voice and, the iconic sound that show had and the moments that they had. For him, it was just, no, it's my job now. It's my sound. I'm going to do it my way. And I just think he probably feels if we had more time, we probably could have had success.
Yeah. And it's cool that he's now at least back with Chris Carlin. To have a host that he's familiar with.
Yep.
ESPN New York is like the ESPN New York versus WFAN dynamic is different than what it was, especially now that both stations are airing on frequencies that are owned by Odyssey. So it's not the rivalry or the ratings battle that it was when it was Kay versus Francesa. But do you still feel like you're in competition with FAN?
Of course, but I don't know how you judge it anymore, right?
Yeah.
Because the Nielsen ratings are not something that we do anymore.
Right.
And streaming still hasn't gotten to a place that it's overtaking listenership on terrestrial radio, right? So I don't know how you measure it anymore. I think it just has to be sound. It's got to be sales, right? I think it's a lot more sales driven for us now, more than ever. And so success now is based on just how much people want to invest in our show. I do really feel like that. Competition wise, I wish I knew. There's no scoreboard, right, Brandon? Like what is the scoreboard at this point? Is it how many people tell me they love the show? How many people tell me that they, congratulations on the move? How many people tell me I'm going to miss you with Bart? Because that's something that for me over the last year or so has skyrocketed. And I guess that's kind of how I'm basing it on, because I haven't changed where I go in life. I still take the train in when I'm not doing a Knicks game. So I'm on, public transportation a lot. I walk around Manhattan a lot of time. I like to walk, so I don't generally take Ubers, or I don't take a cab. Like if I can walk it, I'll walk it. So I see people all the time. And so more and more I've come across people who will recognize me, and it's not just because I'm on the Knicks broadcast. It's they'll yell things about the show. They'll want to debate me about something I said. They'll ask me about something, and I'll hear from people who have said, "Hey, you guys got me through a tough time, through COVID. You guys got me through, if somebody was going to get chemo and they would drive to the hospital. And so I always had you guys on and you made me feel better. It made me laugh and I needed that." Those are the types of things that I've been hearing more and more over the last, year to 18 months that have told me, okay, we must be gaining ground. Because while my time with DiPetro was a lot of fun, I don't think we were getting that kind of audience. I wasn't getting that kind of reaction nearly as much as I am now. So I do want to feel like that's the only way I can measure it, is how many people will make a point to tell me that they listen, even if it's people on social media that want to tell me that either I suck or I had a bad take. Because my whole thing when I see those things is not how dare you or I'm mad. It's like, there's another guy listening.
Yeah.
The guy who says, I've stopped listening. I can't take it anymore. And then I'm 3 weeks later, I can't listen anymore. I can't listen. Okay, well, apparently you still are. So I can only judge it on that. I don't know how else we can put up a scoreboard and say our show is, getting closer to Evan and Tiki.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that anymore without Nielsen ratings.
Yeah. Do you know if the Yes simulcast is that over?
For drive time, it'll move on. I think it makes a lot of sense for them to do something with Michael in his time slot. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. I do have a relationship with MSG, and
right. Would MSG have let you be on Yes?
Yeah. That was not going to get in the way. MSG is so great about this. First of all, remember they're partners in the Gotham app.
Yeah,
so the Gotham Sports app. So, but if I can say anything on this podcast, it's how MSG Network and Kevin Meininger, Kevin Murata, Andrea Greenberg didn't flinch when this news came out. It was just simply, how does this affect what you do for us? And you're not leaving, right? And I felt good about that. And so they've been great working with me. But the one thing that didn't come up was, you can't go on Yes. It was just, how does this affect everything? And the rest we'll figure out. But what I'd like to do is see if MSG would want to jump in where Yes steps away. Does MSG want to come in now and make sure that the show, the drive time show, still becomes a simulcast, or still maintains a simulcast where every bar in New York and the surrounding area has it on, from 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock. So, my fingers are crossed that maybe we can work something out in the near future.
And you, Canty, and Rick were on MSG, or was it like a replay? It was.
Well, Rick and I for 1 year, and then when Canty came on, we did that for a year. So we did it for 2 years, and they would record the show. They would record the 3 hours, and then they would, because it was in the middle of the day, they weren't going to play it live.
Yeah.
And then they would do a best of sort of thing, an hour long best of those 3 hours, and then play it usually right before any of the Rangers or Knicks games. And then in the summer, they just played it as a primetime show on MSG. So it was more of a best of, and a lot of things that were more evergreen than it was topical if there was something that was going to change, because anything that happened between then and when we went live. Sure. But yeah, we were on before.
Yeah, no, and I do think that that simulcast is important. Like you said, just to be on around in bars and things like that. I think there's people that have gotten used to watching the show on TV. So like to not take that away from them.
That's probably one of the biggest things that, in response to when they announced everything, one of the biggest things during last week when we were just doing the show with Strictly Radio was a lot of listeners were frustrated with the fact that they couldn't watch it on TV.
Yeah.
And that's all they kept asking about was this going to be a simulcast? Can we get it? I don't really listen on radio. Like, I'm home, I put it on my TV. This is how I consume it. And so it is. That's why, it's something that I'm hoping we can figure out sooner rather than later, because I don't want to lose that audience.
Yeah, for sure.
And plus, I want clips on Awful Announcing as much as possible.
Yeah, we want those as well. How is working with Mike Breen? I know you do, like you mentioned earlier, you usually do sideline or studio work, but you have called games alongside Breen before.
It's an amazing experience. I mean, he's so talented. Again, it's all, for me, it's always been about learning from people I work with, no matter who it is. Sitting next to Mike Greenberg, on the Get Upset, just watching him go. So sitting next to Mike Breen, it's so easy. I don't know if that makes sense. A lot of times you think it's harder because of the pressure of working next to somebody who's a Hall of Famer, who's a legend like him. But it's similar to what anybody might say about playing with Chris Paul. It's just, he makes the game easy. Like, you don't have to worry so much. The only thing you have to do when you work with Mike Breen is be prepared, because the rest of it is simple. You know when to jump in. You can just sense from his timing. He'll set you up. I just, there are times, I will admit, it's the first couple of times where I would just sit for a moment and look to my left and say, it's freaking Mike Breen. Like, what am I doing here? Like that kind of a feeling. But then I just get into the game because I love the game, and you get lost in it. And by the time the game's over, you just think to yourself like, wow, that just happened. Like, that was awesome. And our first game, I'll never forget, because the very first time I was an analyst on a Knicks game, Knicks broadcast, was Knicks at Dallas Mavericks. This is 3 years ago. And you might recall the ending, because the Knicks had a lead. They lost the lead. And they were up 3, fouled, made the first free throw. Luka Doncic at the free throw line. And we're talking about all the different, matchups and everything, and he's going to miss on purpose, got to get the rebound. And I'm looking at the setup, and I just say quietly to Mike, because he paused, and I go, watch out for Luka Doncic. Got to box out the shooter. Sure enough, ball gets tipped right to Doncic, knocks it down, overtime. And it's like, that was such a cool moment.
Yeah.
And it was a wild game. Luka had like a 60-point triple-double, by the way, in that game also. But like, that's a cool thing. And when that game was over, Mike turned to me. It was my first game. He turned to me. He goes, that was great. Like, he was giving me compliments that just makes you feel like, maybe I can do this. And, again, MSG's been so good to me that from that point, now I think from that year to last year to what I've got this year, I mean, we're talking about, I've done well over 20 plus games. And, I think of John Andres. I don't know if you know that name, but Johnny Hoops, I think of him as somebody that has proven that you don't necessarily have to have played in the NBA or played for the Knicks to be able to sit in that seat. And I grew up with Johnny Hoops, listening to him. And, that gives me the belief, like, yeah, I could do this, and I love doing it. And Mike Breen endorsing it and supporting it is all I need.
Is that something you'd like to do more games?
Oh yeah. I love it. It's such a fun thing to do, but it's also, for me, it's not work. I'm so into the games when I watch them, and I've covered the Knicks since 2006, right? So it's a team that I know very well, and I was a fan of the Knicks growing up, all the way into the 80s. So I know so much. I've written 2 books about the history of the franchise. I feel like if there's anything that I'm knowledgeable and good at, if I'm good at and knowledgeable about anything, it's the New York Knicks. So it's a role that I don't feel is overwhelming, but it is something I would never take for granted. I do know, though, that I have a long way to go if I'm going to earn the appreciation of the viewers. And because I know that there's a lot of people that probably believe that you need to have played for the Knicks or played in the NBA to sit in that seat. And I just want to I always bring up John Andres, and I just say, well, he did it for many years and everybody loved him. So passion, hopefully, takes me a long way, but preparation is the most important. So it's the more opportunities they give me, the more I'm going to get better, and I'm never going to say no to that opportunity.
Have you talked to ESPN at all about doing games? I'm talking about the network, not radio.
So my first game is going to be Christmas Day. I'll be on the radio call with Sean Kelly as the analyst for the Christmas Day game, not the local.
Yeah.
I'll be doing the national call on Knicks Spurs. And so that's my first one in that role.
Cool.
But yeah, I'd love to. But obviously great competition when it comes to that.
Of course. Have you done First Take with Stephen A. Smith there, or only when Smith is away? How is that?
Yeah. Intimidating.
Yeah.
And I've known Stephen A. a long time, and he's always another guy that comes over me into my ear all the time about how, like, I'm watching what you're doing. I love what you're doing. Like, he's such a positive guy. Like, he is always just trying to pump your tires and make you feel great. And so the first opportunity I had to sit across from him, I tried to make him laugh. I think I missed the mark, but I thought, like, let me just say something and try to get him to laugh. And he kind of gave me a smirk, but he didn't laugh full. I'm like, damn. And it like rattled me for the rest of the segment, because I'm like, damn, like, where am I going from here? But yeah, that's fun. But you got to be on your P's and Q's with him.
Yeah.
Because even if you might get him, he's so good at just turning the conversation somewhere else that you don't know is coming. And now you're like, wait, I just won that debate. How are you the one now that comes out the winner? Like, I won that, so, he's just a master. And it's always, because of my 12 o'clock start, I didn't get to do a lot of first take, because I'd have to always start preparing for my show, and I needed that hour. But the times I have popped on that show, it's adrenaline rush.
How was playing basketball against Jay Williams? And I know, obviously, like, you played college basketball, but you and Bart versus Jay and Keyshawn a couple of years ago. How good was Jay?
All right, so I already established I love Bart Scott, so I could tell this story. I never wanted to do this game. Never wanted to do it, because I just know, first and foremost, I have one leg. My right knee has been destroyed since college. Like, it's even though I've had it repaired 3 times, like, it's never the same. I can't really move. I just none of it. So I knew right away, like, all right, I'm gonna be like a statue. I can't move. I know it. But he kept saying, no, I got it. Yeah, he's like, no, I'm gonna guard Jay. You just got to hang out with Key. And Key, look at him. He's overweight. He looks like Sean Kemp when he played for the Cavaliers. You can handle him. And I love Key, so I'm like, I'll just bang with Key. Like, it'll be fine. Like, Bart's in good shape, tough, strong guy. He was a terrific linebacker. He could probably just stay in front of Jay and make this interesting. So, all right, I'll do it. So we're 2 plays in, and Keyshawn and I are literally just like leaning on each other like 2 old dinosaurs. He don't want to move. I don't want to move. And then Bart comes up to me, and it's like 2-1. Like, we actually scored. And he goes, you got to take Jay, man. Like, I got to catch my breath. I'm like, what? You got to guard him. I'm tired. So now I'm like, I can't. He said, no, I can't guard him. Number 2 pick in the draft, like, all player of the year. What are you, crazy? This guy still plays pickup. I can't. Just get off. Just get. So now I'm like, okay. I check the ball. Jay looks at me and just hits like a 3. I check the ball. Jay looks at me, hits a 3. I'm like, Jay, come on, man. You got to do something more than that. He goes, okay. Jay looks at me, takes 1 dribble, passes to Keyshawn, and then cuts. And I'm like, nope. And then Jay, the game was over in a blink. And I'm killing Bart now. I'm like, Bud, you told me you had him, Mr. Linebacker, Mr. All-Pro. You're all about defense. How are you quitting on me? And he goes, I blame the Peloton. The Peloton. I thought that got me in shape. I'm not in shape. And so we get waxed. It's embarrassing. And all the things I was afraid of happened.
Yeah.
So, man, like, it was a nightmare. It was fun to kind of do it, but it was an absolute nightmare. And I killed him for it every time. But yeah, we raised money. Yeah, we got attention on the shows. And but yeah, that's the true story behind that game.
Yeah. Everything you thought would happen is exactly how it went down. You had also, you filled in for Zubin Mehenti when he was out, after that show launched. You did a few months with
5. Yeah.
5 months. Were you in the running to take that job permanently? Did you want that permanently? I know it ended up going to Max Kellerman.
Yeah, I wanted that badly.
Yeah.
Like, again, like, so all this comes after I'm ready to quit the business. I do a night show. Bart brings me back to life. I work with Bart, and they put us national. And then, Zubin gets sick. And first I filled in 1 day. That was all supposed to be. And Keyshawn right away just said, because they had a bunch of fill-ins going, random people that were just coming in. And Keyshawn told me that he told them, I want him. So they kept bringing me back, to a point where then Bart had to get, I think it was Chris Carlin was filling in regularly for me on that show.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it became a regular thing. And I was doing both shows for a couple of weeks before they finally said, okay, that's too much, 5 hours of radio. And I wanted that show badly, because I felt like that show was new. It was still trying to figure out chemistry. I thought I brought the most out of Jay and Key, and I had a good relationship with both those guys. I love the producer, Evan Wilner. He's a bulldog, but he's a over prepared. He had you ready. Like, I felt like that crew in the morning was awesome, and I didn't care. I was waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd be getting in at 4:45 into the studio, and I loved it. Like, it was the first time I said I love radio. Like, I love this, and I felt like I had a chance. But once the Max stuff started getting out, whispers, I knew I had no shot.
Yeah.
Max is a huge name, and so that was probably the greatest loss of my career, like, anywhere.
Yeah.
Because I haven't applied for a job since I was a part-timer at Newsday. Like, everything, like I said, I didn't pursue anything. It pursued me. So this was the first time I wanted something and was told, no, we're going with somebody better. And that was crushing. But, again, I went back to Bart. So it wasn't like I was lost. It just was really, really disappointing and kind of broke me a little bit as far as like optimism of what I can be. But the silver lining is, because of that show was on ESPN2, it was on TV a lot. And so there was some exposure to me being on ESPN, the network, and seen by enough people that it started to become, hey, why don't you pop on Get Up? And I did a first take also with Keyshawn, actually, during that time as well. And it just started to become, why don't you pop on Get Up? And so that experience, while it didn't turn into what I'd hoped it would be, it still opened a door for me doing TV on ESPN Network, which I never thought would ever be something I would ever do in my life.
Yeah.
And now, the last 2 years, from All-Star break to the NBA Finals, I'm on Get Up regularly, and it's been a lot of fun. I've hosted a few times, and it's been an amazing experience. So while, again, it's always the silver lining. You always try to find the positive. So while I was disappointed that I didn't get that opportunity to host that network morning show with Key and Jay full time, it did open a door to doing TV on a great show like Get Up, and get to work with a guy like Mike Greenberg. And so it still ended up being a positive for me.
Yeah, no, it's a tough spot, because you probably deserved that job, but once Max wasn't going back to First Take and he was still under contract, like, ESPN almost needed to find ways to utilize him, and that was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
You and Bart were kind of in the last couple of months the platform that allowed Rex Ryan to promote himself for the Jets coaching job. Based on those conversations, do you think that the Jets should bring him back?
I got to be honest with you, because I don't know who else in their right mind wants that job.
Yeah.
Which is why I think he might end up being the best possible candidate, even if it's like just short term. And it's not for, how good he is energy wise and emotion, and he really gets you fired up. Because when we had him on, and it's just, he just started doing the whole, you're damn right I want the job. It was funny, for a couple of weeks he was sort of hinting, but he wouldn't go all the way. And then we got him one day when I felt like he was begging me to ask him by the way he was talking. And I finally was like, you know what, let me just ask him. And I did. And that's when he gave us the money quote that went viral. And the more I thought about it, the more it's like, look, Mike Vrabel is everybody's first choice. And so to hear reporting that he's the Jets' first choice doesn't shock me. But would Mike Vrabel really want, especially after that story that's come out about the owner and everything, does Mike Vrabel really want to come into this situation? So if he's got a better opportunity, he takes it. What are the Jets going to do? Go for another inexperienced former coordinator?
Yeah.
Who can come into New York and just get eaten alive like we've seen? You need somebody that's got a voice, but I also think what he has said, Rex has said this to us, is I know Woody Johnson, I work for him. I know what comes with working for Woody Johnson. I know how to handle it. So I get it already. And I think that might be also kind of important. So it is definitely, to me, not something the Jets should just dismiss as retread. It might be, for what we have right now, he might be the best possible candidate to be the head coach, the CEO. And then his coaching staff, of course, would have to have some guys that know what they're doing. But you know one thing, the defense won't struggle like it did after Robert Saleh left. And that's got to be their calling card. And then we'll see how things go with him and Aaron Rodgers. He said to me, the first thing I would do is sit down with Aaron Rodgers and say, yeah, I want you back, but we're going to have to do things our way now. You're going to have to buy into our way. And that's a conversation, well, I'd love to be part of.
Yeah.
Because can you imagine that? So, yeah, I think you'd be crazy not to think that he should be in the top 3 when it comes to preferred candidates for the job, because of the passion, his experience with coaching in New York, working for Woody Johnson. And I think also just what he's told me about how much he's learned from what mistakes he made towards the end of his coaching career at Buffalo, and how he's learned so much from being on the media side and being so still connected to the league, that he does feel like, I'll be a better coach now than I was then. And I'm almost curious to see it.
Yeah, I do think being able to work with Woody and handle Woody, that's probably an underrated aspect of this job that nobody thought about a couple months ago, but is certainly something to think of going forward. The last thing I want to ask you is, there has been so much talk in the last couple of weeks about NBA TV ratings being down, and Adam Silver blames less cable subscribers. Others have blamed the 3-point shot, load management. What do you think the biggest problem with the NBA is, or do you think the NBA has a problem?
It does. There's several issues. I do think there is a younger audience that doesn't consume it. And that audience is now becoming a prominent part of your 25 to 54, because we used to dismiss it as it's teenagers, but they're not anymore. They're now over 25, and they don't consume it like we did, where you put on whatever network it is. I mean, there's a reason why all the regional sports networks outside of the major markets are struggling. It's simply because consuming the product is different now. I mean, I have kids, I have teenage kids, I have kids in their 20s, and I watch how they consume sports. And a lot of the times it's on their phone, not watching a full game streaming, but just if they get an alert, then they might put it on. There's a highlight that they'll watch rather than the whole game. That's just generational. So that's something to figure out. Are we seeing the transition of the NBA from LeBron and Steph Curry as the draws to a younger generation of talented players, but maybe they just don't have that same magnitude? Maybe we're almost oversaturated with too many stars, that there isn't that one, megastar. I think super teams, I think, dynasties, I think rivalries are a big part of NBA history. They've always been. And you're not seeing that now. You're seeing different champions every year. You're seeing different contenders every year. And while that's nice, parity sounds great, it's not a great business model for the NBA, my opinion. I do think you have to have the teams you love to hate, the stars you love to hate. I think there needs to be that bit of a divide. Whereas I have my team, like in the 80s, I was a Knicks fan. But when it came to Lakers Celtics, which side were you on? Because you had to pick a side. Lakers Celtics, Bird Magic. You had to pick a side. You don't have that. Michael versus the field in the 90s. I think Shaq, Kobe. There was a lot of that I think was galvanizing for the NBA. And then the Curry years and what they did, and bringing in KD and the controversy of all that stuff. There's just something about that draws in. Drama is big for the NBA. The NBA can't try to model the NFL. It's never going to be the NFL. So I feel like there's some of that going on with the league as well. The 3-point thing, overstated. That's now, we're trying to be too smart, and we're trying to act like it's the game that's wrong, which is what we did to baseball. And now baseball has all kinds of novelties and pranks and everything else going on in it, that we're trying different things to a point now where we're going to take a guy and let him bat wherever we want to have him bat, which is asinine. The NBA can't do things like move back the 3-point line, take away the 3-point line. Like I almost tried to do a parody of something, and people took it serious on Twitter recently, where I said, what if a dunk was worth 3 points? Would that be good or bad? Like, would that help? Because first of all, a dunk is the most exciting play in the sport.
Yeah.
And if you dunk on somebody and that's 3 point, like guys will be trying to dunk on everybody. Like you'll try to find ways to get a dunk, right? Instead of a three. And late in the game, it just changes everything. So I just did it almost as a joke.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe the response that people had to that, where some thought it was a good idea. Others thought it was stupid. But the point is, it just shows you how far we're going, that we're trying so hard to pick apart the game when it's not the game.
Right.
Brandon, we went from Magic Bird to Jordan to Shaq to Kobe to LeBron to Steph Curry. We don't have anybody next. You can tell me all you want about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You can tell me all about Anthony Edwards, Wembanyama. You can tell me all you want about these guys. But they don't right now have the compelling draw that those guys did. And why? Because Curry was in the championship every year. LeBron, every year was playing for a title. Kobe, Shaq won a ton of titles. Michael, ton. Magic Bird dominated the 80s. That helped. Now, Luka was good, but this year, the team is not so good. Anthony Edwards, he had a chance to be there, but his team's okay. Wembanyama is good, but his team is like, who is the guy that every year? And Jason Tatum is on arguably the team that has been consistently great, but he's all right. Like he doesn't draw you in. He's a great player, doesn't have anything compelling about him. And that's because while as a basketball fan, you admire skill and talent. Say Gilgeous-Alexander, you watch him, you're like, wow, that guy's so good. But basketball fans is not who the NBA is trying to bring in. They're trying to bring in the casuals that we all talk about and spit on the ground when we say it. But casuals are what actually gives you ratings. Casuals is why you have all of a sudden this was a great success. Not the diehards. We got you already. I don't need to bring you in. I need to get them addicted. And they're not going to be drawn in if there's nothing compelling about the person. And that's what Curry has done and LeBron has done and all the guys I mentioned before have done. The NBA hasn't found that compelling character that will draw in non-traditional basketball fans who just are interested in this guy because there's something about him that's interesting. And I don't know how you figure that out. You just got to see who it is that emerges, because the NBA has been great for 40 plus years because they've had those characters, and it has to do with dynasties, and it has to do with rivalries, and it has to do with compelling characters that draw you in. And right now we don't have any of those.
Yeah, they have super talented players, but they're not must-see TV players, and
That's right.
And there's not must-see matchups also. And I do think part of that is because you're not getting the same stars and teams battling each other, beating each other up in the playoffs every year. Also, like it takes a few years of that to kind of create those rivalries. And even from a Knicks standpoint, like Patrick Ewing, Knicks Bulls, obviously Knicks Heat, Knicks Pacers when I was growing up, but really anytime Patrick Ewing was playing another like all-star center, like that was must-see TV for me. And you don't have that.
Bird, think about it. Bird, Magic, Bernard King, Dominique Wilkins, Dr. J. Like, think about that era when at that position, small forward.
Yeah.
Every night you were looking at like just compelling matchup at the compelling superstar versus superstar. And that was also something that was part of it too. But I do think we're a bit watered down. We're a bit saturated with, guys who are sort of like, and I mean, the elites of the league are all sort of at the same level, but no one is just off the charts. Again, LeBron's 40 and he's top 5 in the league in assists.
Yeah.
Like he's still one of the great players in the game and he's 40. Well, that's great for LeBron James. I don't know how great that is for the NBA.
Yeah. Alan, you were great. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
This was a lot of fun, Brandon. Thanks for having me too. I appreciate it.
Awesome. That is Alan Hahn. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening. Happy holidays and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.